I imagine I've met some of you in my travels, but I look forward to presenting this material and listening to your input and questions as we get toward the end. So thank you so much. And I also want to thank Jay and Amnon from OC Transpo in Ottawa, Canada, for joining me on this as well. They're going to join me in the presentation. So let's get going. So we're going to talk about the OC Transpo Performance Improvement Case Study.
Kathy, make sure you shared your desktop, please.
Oh, share?
Yeah, make sure you share the desktop so we can see.
Okay, well, I've got it booted up. What do I need to do that?
Do you see the icon that says share my desktop?
I'm sorry, yes, I do.
Yep, there you go. Now we're good.
Okay, that's it. Okay, great.
Okay.
So let me get going again. I apologize, everybody, for that. Let me boost this up. There we go. Are we set now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I am happy to partner with AssetWorks and their clients on performance improvement and software utilization. We developed this partnership a couple of years ago, maybe more than that now, and I work with their clients, with AssetWorks clients, to look at how well their processes perform to deliver what you're expected to deliver, as well as incorporate your software into the process. So the methodology that I use is really a hybrid model of Lean, Six Sigma, Balanced Scorecard, and program management. Some of you probably use some of these methodologies already. So you know that in the process of deploying this method, we define baseline, and we incorporate in that assessment or evaluation how the software is used. And then as we develop the understanding, or I use the term architecture, of what the baseline looks like, we identify what are some of those good ideas of how to get the work done better using the software. The whole methodology, the byproduct to it is it drives accountability through understanding what the process is, and as well transparent measures, so that we can help everybody be on the same team relative to how we're doing the work. And it doesn't install a continuous improvement process. So we're also going to have OC Transpo discuss their experience. So Amnon and Jay, would you like to pipe in for just a couple seconds here?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I wasn't selected to talk to you today because of my knowledge on the Fleet Focus software program, but rather as a mechanic who uses the Fleet Focus program on a daily basis, actually on an hourly basis. You have to remember that the mechanic groups here at OC Transpo, we have about 300 mechanics, is the single largest group who uses the Fleet Focus on every minute of our work. And when I was approached by Jay, who's our Fleet Focus program manager, to join the special committee, he told me that we are not satisfied with the way the Fleet Focus program is working. We were sharing it together with the municipal side, and we are the transit side. You can imagine that transit works very, very different to municipal. Lawnmowers is not the same as a bus, and so on. And he told me that the property has put a lot of money aside to come up with a new product, and we want the end user to be involved to make sure that the end product will be the way the people who use it, such as the mechanics, will be satisfied with the end product. My first reaction was here we go again. They're going to hire a consultant, pay $1 million. They're going to go upstairs behind closed doors with management. They're going to pretend they've talked to the mechanics. But in the end, we're going to get a product which is very different than what we want. So I was very reluctant to do so. But I have to admit today, and through the process, which we're going to go into more details later, that it was very, very unique process. And we had we actually put a posting for volunteers to sit on the committee, and we didn't pay them extra money. It was all on a volunteer basis. And once we had them, we wanted people from each different level skill in the shop, whether it's mechanics, stockroom keepers, supervisors, and so on. We developed a process which we're going to go in details later on. And what's important is management was not involved at all. The people who are, sorry, go ahead.
Let's save the punchline for later and let Jay pipe in here for just a second.
All right, so good afternoon, everybody. As Amnon said, from a leadership perspective, we've had a very successful project, I must say, from a system from Kathy and AstroWorks. As Amnon explained earlier, we got everybody engaged into this project, and the end result where we are today, we're closing off our project, is very successful, and both leadership and management, and leadership and our talent are very satisfied with the end result. And again, as Kathy said, we'll talk more in detail later on in this today's webinar on how we did it and how the results are we're seeing today.
Thank you, Amnon and Jay. So the takeaway here is how to optimize your fleet-focused management system in your operation. And the other consideration here is that PII, or the methodology that I deploy, can be used as a management review or a business process review as well. So now let's get into the case study. Many of you may know what this is. This is process, the idea that we have all sorts of processes that we utilize to get our work done. And some are simple and some are very complex. And most of my experience in fleet has been that you are dealing with extremely complex processes. It's not something that is predictable on a regular basis, but the more that you can drive into the organization, understanding of the process, the better chance you have. So many of our processes, as I call them in baseline, are overburdened with ambiguity, multiple steps, and increasing frustration of just stupid stuff. I'm sure some of you recognize that, and hopefully this discussion will help you think a little differently about it. So now, this case study is about OC Transpo, so I would like Jay to pipe in here and tell us a little bit about OC Transpo.
So OC Transpo is, we're in the city of Ottawa, Canada's national capital of Canada here in Ontario. We're the urban transit service, and we have a roughly fleet of 936 buses, which we just recently acquired 75 double-decker buses from Scotland. We have 4 main maintenance facilities, Industrial Garage being our latest garage that we just built, a state-of-the-art garage with LEED certification. We roughly got about 300 mechanics and about 200 garage attendants that work in the garage shop helping do the cleaning the buses and so on and so forth. Currently from AstroWorks suite of product, we are implementing Fuel Focus. In fact, we're going live at one of our newest facility today. And we're working in a special interest group with AstroWorks to build the yard management software that we're working on for the last year and a half.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. So what we did is as Amnon talked about earlier, we invited in a cross-functional team of talent. Now, talent are those that do the work. Management is involved in the process, but we like to work at the hands-on level, the level where people actually touch the product. So we start with baseline process mapping. Now, the picture that you're looking at right now is an illustration of really a dealership and what they go through for a service experience or transaction. And as you can see, there's many steps in the process, and there are some steps that do not provide value. The red boxes at the bottom are all queuing and waiting. And so as we look at a baseline process, we identify what are the steps that you actually deploy, and when I say you, it's the talent. What are those steps that you're deploying that do the work that is expected of you? And some of that work may not be as valuable as others. So we try and illustrate that in process mapping. Now this is OC Transpo now. This is where we actually did the work. Now we did it as opposed to being a small chart like you saw before. We actually take icons and we have the talent, once again, work through the process and tell us what is their experience of doing the work. What kind of steps do they actually do? Now, you can see a lot of steps on these brown papers that we post. Some of the brown paper shows the steps. They also show where the software is touched to either help or produce information that they need to get the job done. But visual maps define the process. Then we ask the talent again, what works and what doesn't work, so barriers and good ideas. And of course, barriers are those things that slow you down or even stop you from getting your job done. Now, the other aspect of this is we have everybody involved, and Amnon will tell you a little bit more about the story here in a minute. In fact, you're going to be able to see who Amnon is. And I just want to make a note here, and then I'll have Amnon type in. All those pink notes that you see on the walls are barriers. We ask them to describe the barrier, and the green notes are good ideas. And Amnon, if you want to share how you went about collecting those pink notes from your colleagues, that would be great.
Okay, so what did we do is what you see, those big brown sheets, we actually took them on over a period of 2 weeks, 24/7. We went through our 4 different properties from 3 o'clock in the morning until midnight. So we adapted to the shifts of the different mechanics and different shifts because we are a 24/7 operation. And we show them this map from the moment the bus comes in for service until it leaves back to service. And we wanted their input. What are the barriers and what are the good ideas as each step interacts with Fleet Focus? And that's what we did. And we sat them and we spent at least an hour to an hour and a half. And we had every mechanic a chance. Every mechanic that works in OC Transpo was part of that process. And that's the way we actually collected all the barriers and, most important, the good ideas later on to implement the new product.
That's
okay?
Great. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Amnon. So, as Amnon said, we took a look at, so what are those steps? And then we start talking about what are the things that we need to do to change the way we do the process so that we can actually deliver the product better, faster, more reliable, better quality, etc. And I always like to use this chart. Now, you know, when I went to Ottawa, I have to tell you, I was a little bit challenged because normally when I talk to fleet operations, I use football as my analogy on how we think about game, how we develop plans for the game, how do we have plays, how do we develop those plays. And I said to the guys, I think I'm going to have to talk about hockey, aren't I? And they said yes, and I thought, boy, I'm not that familiar with hockey. But anyway, the whole idea here is that after we take a look at the baseline and we understand the complexity and where the barriers are at and understand the good ideas that are produced, then we start talking about what are those plays that we can put in place to help streamline the process, make it more predictable, improve quality and throughput. So in this particular case, the talent came up with barriers and improvements. And you can see here that they came up with a lot of barriers. In fact, the total barriers, 471 barriers. The project team, they did their job of starting that barrier collection by adding their barriers to the maps to start. And then, of course, they went out, as Amnon said, and collected barriers from their colleagues. And they ended up with 471. Now, the good ideas, they had 144 good ideas, and that was also an increase over the project team. We had 306 people that actually toured the fair. So just think about the input of the organization in the baseline analysis and what they thought were big barriers as well as good ideas. And also the idea that once they have their chance to get their, we like to say, fingerprints on the wall, then they get a little more interested in what the result's going to be going forward. So in this particular case, 18 fleet focus enhancements were developed as a result of this effort. And the talent are very proud to be asked for input and anxious to use the upgrade once implemented. And so We can ask Amnon and Jay that here in just a second when we get past the next couple of slides. So the question is, how does this mousetrap work? So we take all the barriers, the good ideas, and we redesign the way we're going to do the work. And this particular case is just a general way of looking at it. The idea that we took the work that was a little scattered, or maybe not scattered, but was not definitive in the way the flow of work happened, and now we architect it in a way that makes better use of the skills of the people and the talent, as well as the flow of the material. These particular charts happen to be from the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. back in 2001, when we redesigned the way they do their work. So here at OC Transpo, we basically had redesigned the work, and we incorporated into that the steps, the software steps as well. Where would you touch Fleet Focus? Where does it make sense to get output from Fleet Focus? How does this, what are those good things that we need to know from the system to help us do our job? So we developed what we call future state process maps that incorporated Fleet Focus in the process. Once we were able to define that, then we take the design and we put measures to it to see if in fact those measures or the process that we've defined is working. And those of you that have heard me speak before, I always say that your future state process is a hypothesis, because until you test it, when you test it with measures, then you know whether it's working or not. So what kind of measures would you use? Well, I like to use a thing that defines a simple set of measures, 9 to 12 at max. The idea is that you look at results, process results, and drivers. The results, I think, are explanatory. But let's talk about process results for a minute. When you look at your process maps and you identify where the clusters of pink notes are at, you know those processes need to be looked at a little bit harder. Now you redesign your process to make it better, but again, it's a theory or it's a hypothesis. So you put a measure in place to try and determine whether that process is working or not. So in this particular case, I'm going to see if I can get my cursor to work. If you look at the left-hand corner here, you'll see that we targeted parts availability and work order parts fill rate as a process that we wanted to study as a result. Now, this is not OC Transpo again. This happens to be Washington, D.C. But the idea here was they had a horrible part fill rate when we did the baseline analysis. So we said, we helped them redesign the way they manage their parts, but we also put this measure in place to make sure that our entitled or our future state process was actually working. The other area that I'm going to go down to drivers now. Drivers are measures that are near-term in nature and are predictable. So they can tell you at the end of the day how well you did. And again, this goes after the areas that need to be focused on in your process because of the barriers that you identified during your baseline. So in this particular case, one of the issues that we had was work order cycle time. And as you can see here in the middle chart, if I can get my cursor to work again here, in this middle chart, it says days here to the left, which was true when we started. It said the average work order cycle time was 20 days. Now, all of you out there, can you imagine how long you'd be in business if you had that kind of performance? So we went into a room full of management and union officials and delivered these charts, in essence, from a result of our baseline analysis. And the people jumped up and said, that can't be true. 20 days is not, that cannot be true. It's not right. So I said to them, well, this is what we got out of your database. And the answer was they weren't punching data into their database. They were filling out pieces of paper, putting them in the supervisor's office, and then about a month later, they would punch it in. Now, you know that the system automatically has points in it that collect when you put data in. So obviously, this is the kind of performance that we were looking at. And the question I asked the people that needed to key punch the data is, do you think your mayor or your city manager is looking at what you're doing on the floor or what the data is saying? So you can see that we immediately brought that down fast, And in fact, I know when we left, the average work order cycle time was less than 4 hours. So there's a drastic improvement there. So now, after that discussion, we did develop a future state process for OC Transpo, and I'd like to turn this over to Amnon and to Jay to talk about the talent role and the leadership's role in this.
Okay, it's Amnon here again. So basically the third tour guide that we did there, like I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'll touch on it in a little bit more details right now, is that we took those spreadsheets, the brown spreadsheet, and we invited the mechanics in and all the interest group in to go and to tell us what's wrong with the system. And we went step by step by step from the moment the bus comes in, gets the work order written down, and I have to admit that we had to make them focus on fleet focus, because the tendency is when you ask them to tell you your barriers, they're going to say, oh, some of the barriers are not related to fleet focus. And it was our task, and sometimes our task, to focus them on fleet focus, how they interact, the process interact with fleet focus, and to be able to make fleet focus better by focusing on that only. Because we had some guys saying that the reason the things don't work here is because I have to work every weekend. Well, that has nothing to do with fleet focus, okay? The fair participation was incredible. Obviously, there's always some guys who are saying, well, I don't want to be involved in that stuff again. We heard about it before, but I would say that 99% of the mechanics and the rest of the interest groups were there. And in the beginning, they were a little bit hesitant to talk or to do anything, but as the process went along, you could see how they actually feeling that what they are going to say there is actually going to make a difference. And later on, we ran this fair twice. Later on, we came and showed them what is the end product, and they can actually show in their own eyes how their suggestions and how their barriers were answered by reshaping the product. And of course, speaking about a year and a half later, as we can look at fleet focus as it is now in the shop, it's not completely finished, they can actually feel that what they were part of this process, it's actually on the floor working and working much better than it was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it's a good example how the end user who actually uses the system is involved on reshaping it and making it good, and made a good use of the money that was spent. And there was a lot of money spent, I have to admit, but it was made a good use.
And I guess from leadership perspective, from a project management perspective, from when we started off this project and I was tasked to initiate to re-implementation on fleet focus, the first thing that came to everybody's mind that we recently had gone through the same type of implementation with their management processes and all that, and that project was cut off in the middle, and there were no results that were seen on the floor. So everybody was a little hesitant to start off this re-implementation, but then upon talking to AstroWorks and Kathy, with this new process, we had to get commitment from our management team to get our talent involved from the get-go. As Amnon said, we had the employees engaged from the beginning to talk about the barriers, where they were giving us all their feedback on the barriers. Apart from fleet focus, they gave us some other barriers that had nothing to do with, but we still had to listen to everyone that came into those fairs and provided the input. And then when we went back to show them the future state, that's how where they saw their suggestions turning into the future state processes. And again, as Kathy pointed out earlier, and Amnon said it, nobody from management was present when we were showing these, when we were doing this tour guides and being tour guides and showing these fairs. It was their peers showing how this process is, how this whole barrier collection worked in their favor to make their system better. In fact, we had one of an enhancement that came out of this fair that we implemented in our production system, and one of the employee that recommended that enhancement was so happy that he went all over the floor telling everybody that was his idea. So it was sort of like it made them take ownership of the product and being sort of they start believing into the product and making sure that that whatever they suggested is being implemented. Again, we had union and management joint initiative. So union was involved from get-go. Their representative was part of these discussions where we wanted to make sure that we don't overlap jobs, responsibilities, and so on and so forth. And it sort of started with the whole employee engagement initiative, and all of our decision making that we made throughout the project was done through that working group that originally was chosen. We did our job code structure in Fleet Focus to be in compliance with ATA, and every single job code, whether it be WAC code, system code, whatever codes that we chose, they were recommended from our working group team, from mechanics, and from our store guys and everybody else. So overall, I think the experience that we received from this exercise was that there was overall system-wide orientation for everybody. Everybody knew what the other person was doing in the system, so they understood it better by doing this type of exercise. And right now we have 18 enhancements that came out of those process fairs, and then we have about 5 interfaces with SAP that we're working on. So we're actually tailing out of the project. We're finishing it off. We're going live in end of November, and all of these changes are because of those process fair, business mapping and those fairs that we had. And again, it's ownership between the talent and joint venture between management and union that it's the result that we're here today.
So, Jay, that's great. Now, here are the benefits as well. I think you did touch on these, but is there anything in here that you'd like to elaborate on at all?
Yeah, it's one of the thing on this slide that I like to touch on is the open communication. Right now, there's communication flowing back and forth between management and our end users. Prior to starting this project 2 years ago, I'm not sure if anybody's aware or not, we had a strike here with the union where we were out for at least 2 months. So between union and management and between our worker or our talent, there was a lot of tension. And this project started right after that dispute. So it was a very crucial and very touchy project to start because we were asking for their input, and a lot of people expressed their frustration during the process fair about the work stoppage and the strike. But again, this helped us to heal those wounds and open that line of communication back up again. And then here we are today after 2 years that we have communication going back and forth between management, union, and our talent. And again, it's the whole employee engagement aspect that made a difference.
Great. Thank you.
Kathy, can I add some few more words if you have a minute?
Yes, certainly, Amnon.
Okay. It talks about communication is that although the process was done and we got those 18 enhancements processed and already been programmed, it's very important to also note that the committee that was involved in that process is still every so often, Jay, getting us together, and every time new enhancement is being implemented on the floor, he's getting us to test it and to go over it and making sure that everything is as the way we asked. Should it not be, it's going to go back to us at work and get it done the way we want it. So the communication didn't stop when the process stopped. It's ongoing all the time. Okay. I also want to just give you a little description on, make it more personal, what we did here and what actually Kathy did with us is basically, if I can take an example, the car you drive every day. Okay. Can you imagine that GM, Ford, or Honda comes to the customers who drive the car and ask them, we want you to be part of the design of the new car that you're going to drive tomorrow. And 2 or 3 years later, you drive this car and you go around the neighborhood, you tell everybody, you see this ashtray, you see this steering wheel, it's there because we asked it to be there. Now, I'm not sure if those big manufacturers do that, but that's exactly what we did here with Fleet Focus program. We asked the people who use it to design it so we can use it the best. And I couldn't find a better analogy than that.
That is great, Amnon. I love your analogy. Okay, so that I think we have time for questions. That is the material we wanted to share today, and Amnon, Jay, and I are available for any questions you have. I know, Rick, you're handling that, so let us know what to do next.
Yeah, no, I don't. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time, but as our attendees can see, Kathy's information is right here. And also, this webinar, as well as future webinar recordings, will be posted on our support site. So should you need to retrieve the contact information, it'll be there for each of you. So I do want to thank everyone for attending today. And Kathy, Jay, and Amnon, thank you so much for doing an excellent job for us today.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Absolutely. All right, everyone have a good day.
Thanks.